During the elaborate to and fro over the contract, Beethoven had been writing a cello sonata, a work which, like nearly all Beethoven's music of this period, makes heroic demands on the performers. Beethoven dedicated it to a friend who was an amateur cellist, Baron Ignaz von Gleichenstein, who had acted as an intermediary during the negotiations. Beethoven had hardly received the contract before his life was thrown once more into turmoil by a fresh outbreak of war. In a series of fiercely contested battles, Napoleon again beat the Austrians back to the gates of Vienna. But this time, the city was not going to be surrendered without a fight. On May the 11th, the siege began. Vienna was bombarded by French howitzers throughout the night and the next morning. Beethoven, who occupied rooms in the inner city, took refuge in the cellar of his brother Caspar, covering his head with pillows. Haydn, now a frail old man of 77, refused to leave his house. During the bombardment, he kept his spirits up, so legend has it, by going from time to time to his piano to play the Austrian national anthem, composed by himself. When the French army entered the city, Napoleon set a guard of honor before Haydn's house. But Haydn never regained his strength. Less than 3 weeks later, he was dead. The existence I had built up only a short time ago rests on shaky foundations. What a destructive, disorderly life I see and hear around me. Nothing but drums, cannons, and human misery in every form. Napoleon returned to Schönbrunn and set about drafting a treaty which would humble Austria, he thought, for good. And soon the ancient House of Habsburg agreed to a union which would have been considered utterly degrading a few years earlier. Napoleon was to acquire legitimacy for his upstart family by marriage to the Emperor's daughter, Marie-Louise. Back in Paris, his first wife, Josephine, was divorced. While Napoleon himself was still in Schönbrunn, he summoned the leading artists of the day to entertain. Beethoven was not summoned. But the day after Napoleon's departure from Schönbrunn, Beethoven conducted a charity concert for the poor. It included the Eroica, music in memory of a great man. The next few years were ones of mounting personal crisis for Beethoven. He increasingly shunned company, slipping away to the country, particularly around the spa village of Baden, 15 miles south of Vienna. By 1813, his creative output seemed to have virtually dried up. When a friend, Nanette Streicher, the wife of the piano manufacturer, found him at Baden that September, she reported that his state of mind was at the lowest ebb, and he had neither a decent coat nor a whole shirt. His deafness must partly explain this gloomy isolation, but it seems likely that a crisis in his emotional life was another relevant factor. All these books on Beethoven, and countless others, contain a section speculating about his romantic attachments. And it may be that part of the reason for his depression that summer in Baden was that he'd passed a decisive moment in his invariably unsatisfactory love life. There are several fascinating mysteries about this period. One of them is his song, An die Geliebte, to the loved one, the manuscript of which has the words added, given to me by the author on March the 12th, 1812. So, given perhaps to the loved one herself, and if so, to whom? And then there's the famous letter, which Beethoven wrote also in 1812, and which was found among his possessions after his death. It was intended for an unknown woman whom he refers to as his immortal beloved, and found at the same time with these two portrait miniatures of young women. Could it be that one of these was Beethoven's immortal beloved? This one was soon identified as Countess Giulietta Guicciardi, to whom Beethoven had dedicated the Moonlight Sonata. He was known to have fallen in love with her when she was only 16, and so she rapidly became the leading candidate for the role of immortal beloved. Others, with each of whom Beethoven had been involved, were the Countess Theresa Brunswick, her sister, the Countess Josephine, Teresa Malfatti, Dorothea, Baroness von Erstmann. The profusion of countesses and other titles in these names reflects the fact that Beethoven moved almost exclusively in aristocratic circles. He was surrounded by young noblewomen, eager to learn the piano from him, creatures who were often bewitching, but always, in sober fact, unobtainable. It may be that he was subconsciously attracted to women who were unobtainable, sensing that his genius would be ill at ease in a conventional married household. And that idea does seem to be supported by the latest research on the immortal beloved. In 1977, an American scholar, Maynard Solomon, proved beyond reasonable doubt that she must be this woman, Antonie Brentano, who had not previously been even thought of as a likely candidate. This is an authenticated miniature of her. And this is the other of the two miniatures found among Beethoven's possessions. There does indeed seem to be a resemblance, though that plays no part in Maynard Solomon's argument. Antonie was married to Franz Brentano, a Frankfurt businessman who was a close friend of Beethoven's. And the love letter, though presumably never in fact sent in this form, was written when the Brentanos were about to leave Vienna for good, to live in Frankfurt. Beethoven's letter has all the confusion of lines written in passionate haste, and as such it's very hard to interpret. But Maynard Solomon goes beyond his factual identification of the immortal beloved into an area of fascinating speculation. He sees the letter as relating to a crisis, the imminent departure of Antonie from Vienna, and he argues that she must have offered to leave her husband and to live with Beethoven. If he's right, then the confused tone of the letter reflects Beethoven's panic, when for the first time, and he was now 42, an ordinary, lasting relationship with one of his adored, unobtainable women became, against all the odds, a practical possibility. The letter then becomes a tortured rejection of the immortal beloved. And in one of the few humdrum sentences in it, Beethoven writes, "At my age, I need a steady, quiet life. Could that be so in our relationship?" Whatever the truth, Antonie went to Frankfurt and never saw Beethoven again, but spent the later years of her long life collecting cuttings about him. And Beethoven went his own solitary way. Ironically, it was idealized love, the safer variety, which brought Beethoven back into the world at this time. Some years earlier, he had written an opera about a perfect woman. That was in more stirring times, the period of the Fifth Symphony. And he had given it the subtitle Die ehrliche Liebe, which means both married love and true love. Fidelia was revived in an altered version in 1814. The central character is the idealized wife Leonora, who disguises herself as a man so as to rescue her husband, Florestan, who has been imprisoned for resisting tyranny. The evil prison governor is about to murder his noble prisoner, but Leonora is determined to protect her husband until the arrival of the Minister of Justice, whose approach will be heralded by the sounding of a trumpet.
Wissen, wer ihm sein stolzes Herz erfleicht, der Rache dunkel sei zerrissen. Sieh her, du hast mich nicht getäuscht, Pizarro, den ich Herzen voll fest. Pizarro, den ich Herzen solltest, steht nun als Rächer, steht nun als Rächer hier. Die Zahlung in die Fürsten voll ist, die Zahlung in die Fürsten voll ist, steht nun als Rächer hier, als Rächer steht nun als Rächer hier. So lieb, nur noch ein Augenblick von dieser Gold. Verrat! Gott so voll!